A few days ago, a jaw-dropping expose on Simon Guobadia's history of scamming the U.S. government made its way to the internet, shocking Real Housewives fans. Simon Guobadia, husband of Real Housewives of Atlanta star Porsha Wiliams, first rose to fame 3 years ago when he debuted on the popular Bravo TV show alongside his then-wife, Fallon Pina. A few months after taping, it was announced that Fallon and Simon were divorcing, and days after that, it was announced that Simon and Porsha were engaged to be married. News of their engagement disgusted Housewives viewers as Porsha and Fallon were portrayed as friends on the show, with Porsha even visiting Fallon and Simon's house to usher in Fallon's debut to the show, where Simon creepily watched in the background as the ladies swam in the pool.
This is my husband, Simon, everyone.
How are you? You're good? Boom, boom. Yes.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for having us.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Thank you for coming.
And I see you laid it out for us.
This is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, that makes me want to get married all over again.
I mean, it's gorgeous.
Yes,
it's
we
gorgeous.
may just have to renew our vows. Ring upgrade.
You know.
Love it.
My friend and YouTube sleuth Tita Tells did several deep dives into Simon and Porsha's relationship, proving that they had been hooking up long before he and Fallon announced their separation. Though you shouldn't feel too bad for Fallon, because she was doing some creeping on her own, and she even got pregnant by her assistant while she was still married to Simon. There were also several investigations into the legitimacy of Simon's perceived wealth, but nothing could have prepared us to find out that Simon had allegedly been scamming the U.S. government for decades and living in the country under false pretenses. I struggle to make sense of how someone can manage to brazenly waltz in and out of a country that had allegedly deported them several times. So I decided to call on one of my friends and YouTube legal commentator, Stephanie from Wine and Chill, to help me unravel Simon's carefully woven tapestry of lies and deception. So Stephanie, thank you so much for joining me again. It's always amazing to have you on the channel.
Thanks for having me, Grace. I'm always happy to come pop over here and to see what type of pop culture legal shenanigans we can get into.
I love it. So what was your first reaction when you heard the news about Simon and his history of just playing in the U.S. government's face like this?
Playing is the key word. My first reaction was like, wow, it's a level of boldness that we only see every few years. I was like, this is a 40-year scheme.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a long-term game. So my first reaction was, wait, which visa did you come in on? Wait, what are the actual mechanics and the practicality of how you've been convicted of doing this since 1982?
Mm-hmm, exactly. Like from what I've seen, I've only seen a slight overview of everything, which is why I'm so looking forward to speaking to you about this for the specifics. But I just can't wrap my head around how he managed to continue getting in, because I feel like the U.S. government, or any government in general, is used to people using fake names, this, that, and the other. So is there not a database of faces, of fingerprints, of biometrics, or something like that to prevent these sorts of things from happening?
So one of the interesting things is the timeline in which he started this, which is 1982. So back then, like, this is pre-internet, this is pre-like MacBook, this is pre-like, hey, let's digitize everything, put everything on the cloud. So I could see how he just was like, well, I'm going to use my brain and do what I want to do and just maneuver around, because it was a lot easier back then than it would be now to go about this type of elaborate scheme. Now, if you overstay your visa, you automatically get pinged in the system that if you try to exit the country, you have overstayed the visa.
Right. And I think they stamp it as well and everything like that. And you made such a good point about this being pre-internet. I think it goes to show like what generation I was born in. And I think yourself as well. You're probably just more ahead of the curve than I am. But I didn't even think about, I know that a world pre-internet exists, but it's just not the first thing that jumps to my mind when I think of 1982, because it seems recent enough, but it's true that this internet that we all are so into is still a relatively new invention. So Stephanie, are you able to give us the rundown on Simon's history with his visas, his permanent residency, getting kicked out, whatever it might be?
For sure. So one of the things to note as a recovering lawyer who mostly focused on tech transactions, when you asked me about this, and I had like a brief stint in entertainment as well, I was like, oh, immigration law I've always been like very fascinated with, particularly because I'm an immigrant myself and living in New York have helped pro bono in certain cases. So this was a great like research project for me, to be honest. So I figured that the best way to go about this would be to look into the court documents themselves and see what the judge said. So that way nobody can say it's hearsay, what was going on. I'm like, no, this is actually written into the court record. So I have it here and we'll just go through a few short paragraphs.
Perfect. Let me pull it up. By the way, you guys, Stephanie's YouTube channel, Wine and Chill, is absolutely incredible. She is always so thorough with her work, as you're about to see in this video. So please do make sure to subscribe to her channel.
Thank you, Grace. I appreciate you. All right. So let's go back before either of us were born to 1982. So I'm just going to read a few, about four paragraphs quickly so we can familiarize ourselves with Simon's very interesting past. Petitioner, so that's Simon, he's the petitioner, because at this point, just to speed us up to 2024, he actually went and petitioned the US government saying, hey, I am owed US citizenship. So he has essentially told himself, which is quite fascinating. So he is the petitioner. Petitioner is a Nigerian citizen. Petitioner first entered the United States on August 11th, 1982. However, he overstayed his visitor visa, and in 1985, INS denied his application for adjustment of status. He was declared deportable and voluntarily departed from the United States on December 28th, 1985. So no, December 28th, 1985, in your mind as the forced deportation, which was voluntary. He said, okay, you know what, y'all are right. I did overstay my visa. I'll be back. He then re-entered the United States in June 1986, a little less than a year later. Petitioner again overstayed his 6-month visitor visa. In September 1987, petitioner was arrested for bank and credit card fraud and pleaded guilty to a felony offense. It should be noted when you're on a visitor visa, you're also not allowed to work, which is a whole nother offense that's not listed in here right now. He was arrested in January 1989 for unauthorized use of a vehicle and again in 1990 for fraud. Thereafter, the agency began removal proceedings. In January of 1991, petitioner committed another felony offense, credit card fraud. In April 1991, an immigration judge held a hearing and ordered petitioner to be deported. So this will be the second deportation. On March 4th, 1992, petitioner was deported and physically removed from the United States. So that was involuntary. It should be noted also, in 1985, he went to adjust the status of his application. He based his 1985 application to the United States on a marriage which the agency, the governmental agency, deemed a sham marriage because of statements by his alleged spouse that the two of them had not resided together and the marriage was never consummated. So essentially, he got married for papers at one point, according to the court. So then in 1992, the interesting thing was while he was deported, he filed paperwork before his deportation. So before his 1992 removal on October 4th, 1988, 4 years prior, Simon used a different identity to seek temporary resident status under the Special Agricultural Worker Program, which should be noted, he has never been an agricultural worker in the United States. He also did not include his criminal history on his SAW application. When his SAW application was approved with the misrepresentations and omissions, he was given a registration card as a temporary resident. On July 25th, 1991, and as part of his SAW immigration benefits, Simon's temporary resident status was automatically converted to permanent resident status following the waiting period. Simon then received his permanent residency card on April 27th, 1992, 26 days after he had been deported under his other undisclosed identity. So that is the background, which we can discuss before we get into the present day.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for this rundown, because it's crazy to me, because this is the question that I have. How does someone with a history like this have the balls to demand citizenship? Is it not too risky of a thing? Because I feel like, being the scaredy cat that I am, permanent residency would have been good enough for me, you know, like, yeah, you don't get to vote or whatever, but you're permanently there. Maybe they're not going to look into you like that anymore. The way that they look into you hardcore when you go for citizenship.
Yeah. I think Honestly, to be honest, I was trying to figure out what would motivate somebody to jeopardize their permanent residency status. So permanent residency status is, I would say, like a very sought after status as an immigrant in the United States, because usually you have to get permanent residency before you can do naturalization. So naturalization is where you become a citizen. Most of my family has done it. I was born here. So then if you're born in the country, you automatically have citizenship. And then there are exceptions for people born on U.S. military bases abroad. So one of the things that I think, because Simon has portrayed himself as this very wealthy, worldly, international businessman, it is unfortunately, due to colonization, xenophobia, and other things, very hard sometimes to travel around with a Nigerian passport. So you will get flagged because of that. Now, Simon might have been like, oh, if I become a citizen, nobody questions you when you have a U.S. passport. Should they? Maybe. But they don't. You can breeze through any security that you want. It's also visa free when you go to visit certain countries. If your country that you are originally from, that you have the passport with, does not have any type of peace treaty or a certain type of agreement with the other country, you can pay $100, $200, $300 for a visitor visa, which is very expensive. Money is probably not allegedly his concern. I don't know how funny or not his money is, but I would assume it's probably the ease of travel, which why he's willing to risk it. I think another thing might be because he's literally been deported twice. That's a very just brazen person. It's a brazen person who's like, you know what? I know you have rules, but y'all don't seem to enforce them all the time, and I seem to be getting away with it. So like, what's the worst that's going to happen? It should be noted now, the reason why this is coming up, because in 2016, he is the petitioner. He petitioned the U.S. government and was like, okay, according to, again, this application that I filed under a false name that you gave me permanent residency status with, I'm allowed to be a citizen now. So that was denied. And then 2020, he filed it again and said, hey, no, I want my citizenship. And to which it was denied again. So in 2022, he then went to the district court, federal district court in Atlanta, and was like, you tell the other agency that I deserve my citizenship. Which,
it's ridiculous. It really is. Like, on what planet, with your criminal history of fraud
being the main thing, because that's one of the things. I wonder if he has just like a bad lawyer, or if the lawyer told him this was a bad idea and he just said he didn't care.
I feel like it's the latter. Because I know you worked in corporate law, but I always hear stories of like lawyers who deal with like one-on-one or criminals or civil things like this, where they're trying to advise people of something, but the people, like, they feel like they know best, and so they're going to ignore all that advice and do their thing anyway. I do want to know, so what happens now that the lid has been blown off of this entire thing? He is a very public person because he's been appearing on The Real Housewives of Atlanta, the spinoff show that he shot with Porsha Wiliams as well. At this point, is the U.S. government actively seeking to deport him? Like, what's the next step here?
Yeah, so technically his petition right now is against the director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. So that's what INS is, and the director of USCIS Atlanta Field Office. So it's going to be up to them, INS, that department, to see if they're just like, you know what, this is utterly ridiculous. We're not dealing with this. One of the interesting things that I, again, am more so on the side that his lawyer probably told him this is a very bad idea. Your citizenship, when you become a naturalized citizen, so you've gone through this process, you were not born here, generally speaking, cannot be revoked. However, there are exceptions. And one of the exceptions is you can be deported as a naturalized U.S. citizen for acts of fraud. His entire application is based on fraud. So I don't know why he would bring this up. Which is like quite interesting, because I reached out as well to a few like immigration lawyers just to make sure, like, you know, this is a new area for me, so that way we could understand it. And they're like, yeah, that's always the number one, particularly with the thought being that if you commit fraud, then you're defrauding the U.S. government, et cetera, which is really fascinating. People have stayed in this country for other crimes, but fraud is where the U.S. government draws the line. Fraud and espionage.
This is insane.
Which I would say could be categorized as a type of fraud.
Right. It feels like, okay, even if you were to get the citizenship, they could look into him and revoke it anyway. So what is the purpose of this? At the end of the day, it feels like permanent residence and lying low was probably his best bet this entire time.
Yeah.
I know that he had a marriage that was deemed fraudulent because it was not consummated. They never lived together, this sort of thing. And he did have a long history of continuously marrying American women. He's had 4 wives, with Porsha Wiliams being the 4th one. And they all seem to be back to back. The time between him and Fallon divorcing and him and Porsha marrying is only months. So do you think that that has something to do with like his status? Is he trying to tie himself to US through marriage? I know he's raised kids here. Like, how does that impact his status?
You know, it's really interesting. So basically, if I'm sure you've watched it, and I know it's a lot of people's guilty pleasure, 90 Day Fiance, which is a Hot Mess Express, where you have fiancés come over on a K-1 visa. That would never apply to Simon because he's already in the United States. A K-1 visa is you are coming from another country because we're madly in love, we're going to get married, we met abroad, etc., and you want to come over. Actually, almost all of our immigration laws are built on and around how you entered. We don't have a lot. It's a complete gray area when it's like you're already here and your paperwork is funny. And so a good example of that that's not nefarious at all is the Dreamers Bill and how people who came to the United States, like when they're 5, 6 years old, and it's like, well, I've been here my whole life. My parents pay taxes. I'm an adult now. I pay taxes. They're mostly in their 30s now. What the US government now is like, oh, what do we do with these people who have paid not only just regular taxes, you have to pay an extra tax. How do we now rectify the problem where our system is built on, okay, point of entry? What happens to people where it's like, oh, I've been here a hot second and you know what? Can we give the paperwork now? And Simon would be an example of that. So him marrying, maybe in his mind, American women, that has no bearing on the current way immigration laws structured. Because again, it's about point of entry, and he was here a long time by the time he married Porsha.
Okay. So he thinks it's going to protect him, but it doesn't look like it. And what about children, having children? Because his children are still under the age of 18, I believe, and they are American citizens. So what happens basically if he is to be deported?
Yeah, there are usually protections if you do have children in the United States and you are from another country. However, we have seen in recent years, the American government be like, I don't care. And unfortunately deport like people who don't actually deserve that. Simon is a whole different bag of worms. And again, one of the things I think is interesting in terms of the differences between permanent residency and US citizenship, like to your question of like, why would you risk it? You're not getting that much more benefits as a US citizen than as a permanent resident. Permanent residency, you do have to renew it. So every so often you have to check in and like, hey, I'm still here. I'm still paying my taxes. Yeah, I'm still doing all these things. You're not allowed to vote in any election. And then you don't have a US passport. Other than that, what again was the reason to go about this for numerous years? Because his 2016 original petition, we're 8 years later now, has been denied twice. And he still was like the last denial being, I said 2000, so I was wrong. It's actually 2022, right before he married Porsha in July of 2022.
And so basically, is it possible? Do you think that this could be a strategy for him to seek a lawyer to get certain things expunged from his record? I know he's got felony charges for credit card fraud, identity theft, things like this. Would that have any bearing, or does it still not matter because he's got multiple aliases here in the US or there in the US?
You know, it's really interesting. And I'm trying to keep like all these dates straight because he's gone through this so many times. So just for one quick second, so that way we can clean it up. So he actually applied. I was right. It's 2020. In 2016, 2020 to file for the citizenship. And then the last time, because he got denied twice, in 2022, he went and filed this to say like, hey, that 2020 ruling is incorrect. I deserve it. So just to put that in there. And then in terms of, what was the question one more time?
Expunging certain things. Because I know when you,
So expungement is interesting in that expungement basically wipes your record clean. So you have a DUI, etc. If you're a juvenile and you do things, expungement is usually available, or for like anything deemed petty crime later on. One of the things interesting in this specific petition by the district court is that they say he was arrested, but they don't talk about whether or not he was convicted. And because he was deported, my question was, oh, is he convicted of these charges or just arrested? Because if you're just arrested, there's nothing to expunge.
I know that he pled guilty to some of these charges, the felony charges, but it doesn't say anything about conviction or anything like that. You are right that is an important detail.
Which I think is really interesting. In terms of expungement, you cannot expunge the fact that you filed for a separate identity to get into the country under a specific visa program. Expungement would never cover that. Expungement is always things that are small. So like, for example, selling natural trees, because I'm like, what does the algorithm not like? Is legal now. Unfortunately, it wasn't legal 10 years ago. So people can move to be like, hey, I'm not El Chapo. Like, can you remove like my that on there so that way I can get a job? Because like if you have convictions, it is harder to get employment, etc. Defrauding the INS is not on the list of expungement.
Oh gosh,
he's not going to find a lawyer that's going to be able to do that for him.
He's backed himself into a corner then. It seems to me like there is no option. So why would a person like that agree to go on reality television then?
We need to find a psychologist, because to me, if you know that you've committed wild amounts of scammery and foolery, I would lay low, you know?
Exactly.
I think it's really fascinating his like desire to not only just be on reality TV. So when he was with his ex-wife, he was kind of like in the background. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't Peter. He wasn't talking all the time to then be like, oh, I'm marrying Porsha. We're in the limelight. We're doing this. We're having 2 weddings. And fascinating.
It really is, because now it's making me think of Joe Giudice from The Real Housewives of New Jersey. He is a person, his parkour is a little different because he was brought to the U.S. with his parents when he was only 1 year old. And so he grew up his entire life there up until his 40s, when he was convicted of his own kind of fraud and then thus deported. And he never had citizenship in all his 40-something years of being there. So he got deported and he had young children, but his wife at the time, his ex-wife, Teresa Giudice, she had her citizenship. So those kids stay in the U.S. being raised by her, while he's not even living in Italy anymore. I think he's living in the Bahamas or something like that. So do you think that that could be a possibility with Simon, that his children, if he were to get deported, are going to be raised by the various moms and he's going to be wherever else? Maybe he'll go back to Nigeria. Maybe it'll be Costa Rica, Dubai, maybe, I don't know, England. You really, you know, he's a bit everywhere, the guy.
Yeah, I think that's actually most plausible. And I forgot about Joe. Joe is a great example of what the U.S. government is like. Yeah, how a 1-year-old has no agency. So it's not your fault that you don't have any paperwork, and how the U.S. government will let it slide. But fraud is the #1 reason why they're like, oh no, the fraud is not, which is like really interesting.
Yeah. So how much, this is always a question whenever the Real Housewives husband get into some mess, how much do you think the wife knew? Porsha, some of the stuff is quite recent. So in your opinion, has she been aware of this for a while?
So to be honest, unless you have like a relationship with somebody where you're like very transparent all the time, and they're like, okay, my lawyer is filing this court document. Do you want to look at it? Like, look what's going on. I could see a world in which he told her like, hey, I've been in this country all these years. The last petition, again, this set of petitions is from July 2022. They get married in November 2022. So I could see him telling her like, oh my gosh, we're getting married. I'm finally going to become a citizen. I went and filed my paperwork. And, you know, she's come a long way. But this is the same woman that did tell us that the Underground Railroad, you know, she thought it was a train system. Okay. I don't think she looked into it. One of the things I find really interesting, though, is does she know more so about the criminal record? Because if you knew about the criminal record, then you'd know that, oh, you've entered here a few times illegally. Like, I would be curious to know if she knew that he ever got deported so many years prior.
I wonder too. And that's the thing, is that these documents, from what I saw, like I have a PDF of it all, and it's just like listing it all year by year. And it feels like they have been hidden in plain sight all this time. Like no one really took the time until all of a sudden it was out there on the internet. So do you think that there's any motivation behind someone, like who would have the motive to broadcast this all of a sudden?
I mean, Bravo needs ratings. It is like a juicy thing to talk about. Like, oh my God, like look what's going on. I think what's interesting too, in terms of like Porsha is going back. So the question is like, oh, is she going back because like now Simon won't be able to, you know, make income, etc. If he's like not allowed back in the United States, how's that going to look? Or is she coming back because like this is a great storyline? Like who knows? Like I would not even go to sit here and guess about that. One of the things I think is interesting though on her end of like whether or not, you know, somebody who's committing this level of fraud in the 80s, in the 90s, multiple decades long fraud is not committing all this fraud to then be like, yeah, I gave it up for 20 years and then picked it back up in 2016. That's not likely.
I agree. I think the next thing that, you know, to uncover is his income. I know that like since he hit the scene, a lot of people have been saying that he is a scammer. I know I've been hearing things of him being a Nigerian scammer, and I've always kind of shied away from that conversation because I do find it to be a little bit xenophobic, the way in which people, you know, speak of Nigerian people and scamming. But I do remember as part of this expose, there was some information about his companies kind of being shell companies, which begs the question, where does the money come from? Like who are his connections? I do think that that is the next thing to uncover. But I do have one last question for you, which is basically what happens to their marriage if the government says, hey, you've been frauding us for too long, it's time for you to go, and now we know you too well, you're a huge public figure now. Does Porsha go to Nigeria with him?
One of the things my question is the marriage under his actual name?
I didn't even think of that.
Because he's currently petitioning the US government since 2016, so starting 8 years ago, to receive his citizenship under naturalization under what the US government is saying in the court documents. Hey, you receive this temporary status that turned to permanent residency status under the agricultural program under false pretenses, under a fake name. So is this the same identity you have been now using since you started this hullabaloo in 1996? Because what the court has not established is, yes, they deported him, and then 26 days later, he received his residency papers under the other name. Nobody has ascertained, okay, when did he come back into the country under the other name? Because he's been here. So my assumption and my next question is then always, okay, is this even a legal marriage, or is the paperwork correct?
Oh my God, Stephanie, that's actually scary. It's giving me goosebumps because now I'm wondering, this man has been married 4 times. So how many times per identity at the end of the day? Who is this man? This is creepy. I would feel really creeped out, like sharing a home with this guy, waking up next to this guy, having my child around this guy that you really don't know who he is at the end of the day. Are his identities under like completely different names? I know his name is Simon Guobadia, but what are his other aliases?
I'm not sure, to be honest. That part I didn't get a chance to dig into. I would be curious to know, because clearly the INS department is aware of the other alias. Because it's not like he had the other alias and then decided like, okay, I'm just gonna, you know, fly under the radar. He actively filed more paperwork under the other aliases. So like there's entire paper trails, pre-internet or not, of multiple aliases that he has.
Oh God, I don't know how he keeps track of all of this. It's just too much for me to comprehend. I can't. Is there anything else about this case that you think some people might have missed out on? Because it is an overwhelming amount of information that has come out.
Yeah. I think in terms of things that people, you know, should be curious about and that might be applicable to your real life is, if you have a friend that is a lawyer, or you make a friend that's in law school, you can look people up on LexisNexis. Are you supposed to do that? Are they supposed to do that with their login? No. But I have plenty of friends when we were in law school that may or may not have used LexisNexis to look people up. All of this would have come up in a LexisNexis search. LexisNexis search.
So Stephanie, if you were Porsha's lawyer, how would you advise her? Do you think she has gone to see a lawyer about this? What should she do?
I would assume
as his wife?
I would assume so. As his wife, as a person who's now tied to this person that the U.S. government has deemed a scammer, if I were her lawyer, I would secure her assets or the assets she thinks are there, because you don't know if any of those assets are there. Like, does this man actually own this house? Have you seen the deed to this house? Is this rented? A lot of Real Housewives franchisees, a lot of Real Housewives employees, aka the staff, they are renting the home. But since he was separately away from that, like, okay, what money did he tell you he has? Because you are entitled to half of it. Or if you have a prenup, it might look a little bit different. So I would go through all of that with her, but also to make sure that in the instance that now the government is like, you know what, you're too bold, let me look up into everything, to make sure that her name is not like, Erica Jane on, shell companies, to where you're now getting dragged into a problem when you're like, wait, I didn't know there was a problem to begin with, because the U.S. government is not very friendly to believe that you didn't know. And in her case, she's not that nefarious. So if I was her lawyer, I would start doing a separate financial investigation on her behalf.
Do you think that's the next move for Porsha? The smartest move is to start consciously uncoupling herself from this man?
I would say, at least in the paperwork wise. And then also, you know what? If the marriage is for the long haul, be honest and be like, hey, you did lie, I didn't know. Or like, hey, you told me, but I didn't know it was this bad. And I don't want to be under the slammer. So you know what? Let us, as my spouse, who should care about my well-being too, particularly if I didn't do anything. So I'm going to start, doing an audit of you. Okay, cool.
Good. I feel like she really should do that, because it is scary. Who knows what her name is on at this point? I know they had been talking. I had heard rumblings of them having opened. Maybe it was him with Fallon. I might be confused, but there was a rumbling of him having had a restaurant or something like that with one of his wives.
A restaurant? Why?
I don't know. It seems to be a thing over there. Restaurants and lounges in Atlanta.
And then with Atlanta's restaurant scene being in commotion.
You remember Peter Thomas and his restaurant.
I was trying not to bring it up.
Well, here's the thing. The news broke when he and Porsha were in Dubai. And then now, just yesterday, he posted a selfie where he's claiming to be in his American home in Atlanta.
I love that you said claiming to be.
That's the thing, right? Thanks, girl. You really never know with these people. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors. So if it is true that he managed to get back into the USA from Dubai, why do you think that is? Because again, at this point, he should be flagged in the system, right, for travel. I think he should be someone who's barred from re-entering at this point, no?
So technically, like, he'd have to have a hearing to revoke his permanent residency status. So that hasn't occurred. So technically, unless the INS is opening an investigation into him, which they haven't stated yet, he could still fly in and fly out. Would I, knowing that I have now showed the crack of my ass, be flying out? No, I would not. I would be sitting in my rental or owned American home until, I have deciphered that the INS is not that mad at me.
Exactly.
I think that's still a permanent resident. So, and for what it's worth, because he filed these petitions of his own fruition since 2016, and the INS did not initiate any deportation proceedings, they know he's committed fraud. So my assumption as of 2016 would be like, they know, and they're just like, you know what, we're just not giving you citizenship, but you have shown enough that you're paying your taxes, you're doing all these things. We won't deport you, but you're never going to get to be a citizen.
But that's the thing I don't understand, is that he's got permanent residency, but he's got deportation orders at the same time, because under his initial alias, he had been ordered to deport. Right. And now he's got permanent residence under someone else.
Well, he was deported under the original alias, though.
And so then he came back with it. Okay. So
that's like the interesting thing. So he was deported and physically removed on for the second time on March 4th, 1992. However, 26 days after that, on April 27th, 1992, he received his permanent residency card. So at a certain time after 1992, between 2016, he just re-entered under the permanent residency card.
Oh gosh. Listen, I am hoping to hear some news about this moving forward. I wouldn't be surprised to hear about a hearing, but you do raise an interesting point, which is that so far in all his time here, he has been here a very long time. I think this is
a very long time, which is, to your point and your question again, I don't know why you would test your luck after like, you know what? They said I could stay. All right, I'm never going to get a blue passport. Sure, fine.
Exactly. It's not that bad compared to all the things they can do to him, right? With all that he's done against the country. So maybe it's kind of like a truce that they want to call with him at this point. Who knows? Because it has been a very, very long time. He went to the US when he was about 18 years old. So deporting him to Nigeria or wherever else, he doesn't really have a home or roots like that outside of the US, it seems like. So it is a rather complicated situation that we definitely will continue following. So do make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and definitely to Steph's channel as well, Wine and Chill. I will be leaving a link to her channel in the description box down below, and make sure to like this video as well if you found it to be informative. Thank you guys so much for joining, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.
Bye. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So there you have it, you guys. Simon really is living on borrowed time in the United States of America due to his permanent resident status having been issued under false pretenses. How will this story evolve? Will he eventually get deported, or will the US government just let bygones be bygones? Only time will tell, but in the meantime, I do want to hear what you guys think about this entire ordeal. Make sure to let me know all of your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below, and as usual, we'll chat. That's all for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye, guys.